Did you just call my mommy ugly? She didn't scream it. She didn't whine it. She delivered it with the absolute, unshakable certainty of a prosecutor who already has the evidence and just needs you to confess on the record. Her name was Alma, and at 7 years old, she had never once encountered a monster she felt she couldn't outstare. Kong Tae-jin looked down at her slowly. The most feared mafia boss in the city, a man whose sleek black suits and neck tattoo alone were enough to make seasoned criminals clear a room. His sharply defined face remained perfectly controlled, but an edge of dark amusement flickered in his eyes. "Go back to your mother, little girl," he said. "I will," Alma replied. "Right after you apologize." Behind Tae-jin, his bodyguard Seo Min-jae visibly stiffened. Han Ji-soo suddenly found the cracks in the pavement incredibly fascinating. Tae-jin leaned forward slightly, his shadow swallowing her small frame in the bright red dress. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Alma tilted her chin up, the colorful beads on her braids clinking softly. She pushed her large round glasses up her nose and evaluated him the way someone looks at a poorly trained puppy. "No," she said, keeping her hands planted firmly on her hips. "But I know what your friend said. And I know it was mean. So it doesn't really matter who you are, because your name doesn't fix his manners." All right, pause for a second. Have you ever witnessed a child step into a nightmare scenario that would make a grown man run and absolutely refuse to blink? Because that is exactly what Alma just pulled off. A 7-year-old girl in a stained red dress, standing dead center in a bustling market, scolding a ruthless Korean mafia boss like she's the one pulling the strings. If you love gripping stories like this, stories where the fiercest courage shows up in the smallest packages and cold hearts are forced to melt, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because the way this standoff unfolds, no one expected her action. The market was so quiet you could hear the wind brushing against the canvas awnings. Kong Tae-jin stared down at the little girl in the red dress. Alma stared right back, her large round glasses catching the afternoon light. She did not blink. She did not step back. Tae-jin let out a slow, quiet breath. He shifted his dark eyes to the man standing stiffly to his left. He didn't say a single word, but the slight tip of his head was a clear command. Seo Min-jae, a man who regularly cleared out underground gambling rings, swallowed hard. He took one awkward step forward. He looked at the deep brown eyes of the 7-year-old, then over to her mother, Elena, who was standing frozen behind the food stall. "I apologize," Min-jae said. His voice was tight and uncomfortable, but it was loud enough for the whole market to hear. "My words were disrespectful." Alma evaluated him for 3 long seconds. She crossed her arms over her bright red dress, ignoring the chaotic stain on the front. Finally, she gave one sharp nod. "Thank you," she said simply. But she wasn't finished. She turned her attention back to Tae-jin. Her fierce expression softened just a tiny bit, shifting from angry to deeply disappointed. "You could have just told him to be quiet," she said to the mafia boss. Her voice was calm and steady. "You were standing right there when he said it. But you didn't do anything." It wasn't a yell. It was just the plain truth, spoken by a child who expected better manners from grown-ups. Tae-jin stayed perfectly still. For a second, a strange look crossed his sharply defined face. It wasn't anger. It was something closer to surprise. Before he could figure out what to say, Alma turned around. Her beaded braids clicked together as she marched proudly back to her mother's stall. She climbed onto a tall wooden stool, opened a math workbook, and picked up her pencil. The conversation was over. Tae-jin watched her for another long moment. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. His men quickly fell into step behind him like shadows. A minute later, a row of sleek black cars pulled away from the curb. Inside the last car, the busy city flashed by the tinted windows. Min-jae sat quietly in the front, keeping his eyes on the road. In the back seat, Kong Tae-jin was looking out the rear window, staring back toward the colorful market stalls they had just left. Min-jae gripped the steering wheel a little tighter and kept his mouth shut. He had worked for this cold, powerful man for 3 years. In all that time, he had never once seen Kong Tae-jin look back at anything. 3 days went by. Life at the food stall returned to its loud, busy normal. Well, mostly normal. The only difference was the three men in dark suits standing near the fruit stand, pretending to care about melons. Alma noticed them on the first day. By the third day, she put down her math homework and marched right over. "I remember you," she said, pointing at the tallest bodyguard. "You were standing on the left." You stared at the ground. The man froze, completely unsure of what to do with a fierce 7-year-old. Alma didn't wait for him to figure it out. "Tell your boss I am still waiting for him to show he has actually learned something. Give him my message." That same afternoon, the sleek black cars returned. Kong Tae-jin stepped out into the bright market, his suit perfectly pressed, the dark tattoo on his neck sharp and intimidating. The crowd parted for him instantly. He walked straight to Elena's stall. Elena wiped her hands on her apron, her face guarded and cautious, but she did not tell him to leave. Alma was waiting. She hopped off her tall wooden stool and pointed to a sturdy plastic milk crate right beside her. Written across the side in thick, black permanent marker were the words, "Mr. Iceface, seat reserved, improvement in progress." Tae-jin looked at the crate, then down at the little girl in her round glasses. "Mr. Iceface?" he asked, his voice low and smooth. "Because you never change your expression," Alma explained, planting her hands on her hips. "Now, sit down. We have work to do." To the absolute shock of his bodyguards, the most feared Mafia boss in the city slowly lowered himself onto the plastic crate. His long legs looked slightly ridiculous folded up like that, but his expression remained perfectly calm. He did not complain. "If you want to have better manners, you need a proper schedule," Alma told him, opening a fresh page in her notebook. "Step 1 is consistency. That means showing up. Step 2 is food. My mommy's food makes people nicer. Step 3 is honest conversation." Tae-jin sat quietly as Elena placed a steaming bowl of rice and beef on the counter near him. The warm, rich smell was incredible. He watched Elena moving gracefully behind the stall, and then looked back at the bold little girl who was currently planning out his life. He told himself he was only here for reconnaissance. He needed to gather information and keep a close eye on things in this part of the city. It was just a smart business move. But as Alma tapped her pencil and began to lecture him on the importance of being a good listener, Tae-jin took a bite of the food. He looked at the warm, bustling stall around him, and he realized he was not entirely convincing himself. The routine settled in quickly. Every afternoon, Kong Tae-jin's black cars parked at the edge of the market. He walked past the fruit sellers and the noisy crowds, straight to Elena's food stall. His bodyguards, Cha Do-hyun and Han Ji-soo, learned to stand stiffly by the spice racks, trying to look tough while their boss sat on a plastic milk crate marked Mr. Iceface. Tae-jin sat quietly, holding a warm bowl of food, and listened. Alma talked the way a river flows, constant, natural, and completely unstoppable. "So, Bianca tried to take my pink eraser on Tuesday," Alma explained one afternoon, swinging her legs off her tall stool. Her colorful beads clicked together. "I didn't yell. I just gave her a very specific look. Now she brings me fruit snacks every day at recess. We are actually best friends." Tae-jin swallowed a bite of beef. "You solved a problem that wasn't really yours." "All problems are mine if I am standing near them," Alma said simply, pushing her large round glasses up her nose. "Mrs. Park says I have strong leadership skills. She is my teacher. She is very strict but fair. And remember, her husband is still a pastor, so if your manners stop improving, he is available." Tae-jin's lips twitched. It was the closest thing to a smile his men had seen in years. He didn't plan for this to happen. He was a man who commanded a criminal empire, someone who spent his days dealing with threats and violence. Yet, somehow, he found himself looking forward to this plastic crate and this fierce little girl in a red dress. It was the only peaceful part of his day. Behind the counter, Elena kept her eyes on her cooking pots, but she was listening too. Tae-jin felt her gaze on him, cautious but curious, and it made the air between them feel warm and heavy. Alma took a bite of her rice, chewing thoughtfully. Then she looked up, her dark eyes locking onto his. "Do you have a mommy?" The question dropped into the space between them, sudden and simple. Tae-jin's posture went perfectly still. The slight warmth that had settled in his chest vanished, replaced by a cold, familiar shadow. "No," he said. His voice was flat, empty of any emotion. Alma stopped swinging her legs. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't push for details like an adult would. She just looked at him with complete, pure understanding. "I am sorry," she said softly. She meant it with her whole chest. There was no pity, just the honest sorrow of a child who knew that not having a mother was a terrible thing. Tae-jin looked away. He stared at the busy street, but he didn't see the crowds. Deep inside him, beneath layers of ice and survival, something small and old and locked shifted just a little bit. The noisy sounds of the market slowly rushed back in, filling the quiet space between them. Alma reached for a bright yellow crayon. Tae-jin held her gaze. He was a man who commanded an army of dangerous men. He made impossible decisions every single day without blinking. But right now, looking at this little girl in her red dress, he felt a strange, heavy tightness in his chest. He did not know why it cost him so much to answer her. He just knew that it did. "Yes," Tae-jin said softly. The coldness in his eyes completely melted away, leaving something entirely human behind. 3 is a very good number. Alma studied his face. She seemed to evaluate his answer. Then, she gave a firm, satisfied nod and picked up her yellow crayon again. She went back to her drawing with the calm pride of someone whose long math equation had just proven to be perfectly correct. Nobody spoke. Tae-jin's bodyguards stood nearby like statues. Elena stared blindly into her soup pot, her heart beating wildly against her ribs. Nobody said out loud what had just happened. But as the afternoon sun beat down on the colorful awning, everyone standing around the stall felt it. The quiet magic around the food stall did not last long. A few minutes later, a regular customer walked up. She was a loud, chatty woman who liked to gossip while she waited for her lunch. As Elena handed over a steaming container of beef and rice, the woman smiled and patted Elena's arm. "You make such delicious food, honey," the woman said with a light laugh. "But you should really watch how much of it you eat yourself. You have a beautiful face, you just don't want to get too heavy." The woman did not mean to be cruel. She said it like it was helpful, friendly advice between women. Because it was said so casually, the careless words landed even harder. Elena did not argue. She just offered a practiced, polite smile that she used for difficult customers. But for one single second, the bright light in her dark eyes completely faded. Alma saw it. She always saw it. The little girl stopped coloring. She placed her yellow crayon carefully on her open notebook. She did not yell, and she did not throw a tantrum. Instead, she looked directly at the chatty woman and spoke in a clear, calm voice. "My mommy isn't fat," Alma said. The customer blinked, surprised by the fierce little girl in the red dress. "She is full," Alma explained, her voice completely steady and without any extra drama. "Every time she hugs me, there is enough of her to make me feel completely safe. There is enough of her that nothing bad can ever reach me." Alma pushed her round glasses up her nose and lifted her chin. "That is not fat." "That is exactly right." The space around the food stall went completely silent. The customer stood frozen, holding her food, her mouth slightly open. Behind the wooden counter, Elena pressed her hand flat against her chest, her breathing suddenly shaky as she stared at her brave daughter. On his plastic milk crate, Kang Tae-jin stopped breathing altogether. Alma's words echoed in his mind, pulling him far away from the busy, colorful market. Suddenly, he was not a feared mafia boss. He was a small boy again, standing quietly outside his father's heavy office door. He remembered the cold, sharp sound of his father's voice. He remembered looking at a photograph on his father's grand desk, a picture of a woman being erased from their family because she was not considered important enough. That day, his father had taught him that softness was a terrible weakness. For 30 years, Tae-jin had built a thick wall of ice around his own heart, following those cold rules before he was old enough to question them. Tae-jin blinked, the loud market rushing back into his ears. He looked at the brilliant 7-year-old girl, and then at her hardworking mother. The thick wall inside him was not magically gone. He was not completely fixed. But as he sat there, he felt a deep, massive crack form right down the middle of his frozen heart. And a crack is exactly how fixing starts. The market was still covered in cool morning shadows when Kang Tae-jin arrived. This time, there were no sleek black cars and no stern bodyguards in dark suits. The busy crowds had not arrived yet, and Alma was still at home sleeping. There was only the quiet scrape of metal as Elena set up her heavy cooking pots for the day. Taejin stopped in front of the wooden counter. He did not say good morning. Instead, he reached slowly into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn, faded photograph. He placed it gently on the wooden surface between them. Elena wiped her hands on her apron, her brow wrinkling in confusion. She looked down. It was a picture of two small children sitting on the wide stone steps of a very grand house. They were bathed in bright summer light. The little girl in the picture was laughing so hard her whole body seemed to shake with joy. Beside her, a young boy sat quietly. He was watching the girl like she was the most interesting and wonderful thing in his entire world. Elena reached out with shaking fingers and picked it up. She knew those heavy stone steps perfectly. She had sat on them every single morning of her childhood, waiting quietly while her mother cleaned the massive house inside. She carefully turned the photograph over, searching for a name, but she didn't need one. Her breath caught in her throat. "I remember you," Elena whispered into the quiet morning air. Suddenly, the buried memories rushed back like a breaking wave. She remembered the quiet, wealthy boy who used to sneak outside to sit beside the cleaner's daughter. The boy who always shared his lunch without ever being asked. The boy who, in a giant house that made her feel so small and invisible, made her feel like she actually belonged somewhere. Elena slowly looked up from the faded paper. She stared at the tall, dangerous mafia boss standing in front of her. She looked past the dark neck tattoo and the cold black suit. That gentle little boy was this man. The shock of it was entirely too heavy to carry. Elena's legs simply stopped working. She sank down, right there on the dusty ground behind her food stall. She pulled her knees to her chest, holding the old photograph tightly with both hands, while her entire world spun and rearranged itself in real time. Taejin did not try to pull her up. He did not tell her to calm down or offer empty apologies. Instead, he slowly crouched down directly in front of her, letting his expensive suit touch the market dirt. He stayed perfectly still and completely quiet. He just watched her, his dark eyes open and steady. Because some moments in life do not need any words at all. They just need someone who is brave enough not to leave. The afternoon sun beat down on the colorful market, but the air around the food stall felt thick and heavy. Taejin was sitting on his plastic milk crate, listening to Alma explain the strict rules of her playground. He reached across the crate to hand Alma a fresh yellow crayon. As he stretched his arm forward, the dark sleeve of his expensive suit pulled back. Elena looked up from her cooking pot at exactly the wrong moment. There, on Taejin's right wrist, just below the bone, was a scar. It was small and perfectly curved, shaped exactly like a tiny crescent moon. Elena's breath completely stopped. It was the exact same mark from a dark, confusing night 7 years ago. A night she had spent every single day since refusing to think about. She remembered the fear, the fog, and that specific scarred hand. Clang. The heavy metal ladle slipped from Elena's fingers and crashed against the side of the metal soup pot. Alma stopped talking immediately. She pushed her round glasses up her nose and stared at her mother. Taejin froze, his dark eyes instantly snapping to Elena's pale face. "I am fine," Elena managed to say. She forced her voice to stay perfectly steady through sheer willpower. She looked at her bold little girl in the red dress. "Alma, please go to the end of the row and fetch me a bucket of fresh water." Alma's dark eyes narrowed slightly. She sensed the sudden, nervous shift in the air, but she nodded. She hopped off her tall stool and marched off into the busy crowd. As soon as Alma was out of sight, Elena turned away. She did not look at Taejin. She walked quickly past the sizzling pots and slipped into the narrow, shadowed alley right behind the row of food stalls. She walked until she hit the cold brick delivery wall, and then she stopped. She fell apart completely. She did not make a single sound. She slid down the rough wall and pulled her knees to her chest. She cried silently for the terrifying, chaotic night neither of them had chosen. She cried for the sweet childhood friend she had lost when she was only 8 years old. She cried for every single night she had tucked Alma into bed all alone, pushing down her own deep loneliness so her brave daughter would never have to carry it. Most of all, she cried for the quiet heartbreak of the drawings, the pictures of 3 people that Alma had been making since she could hold a crayon. She cried for all of it. And then it was over. Elena stood up. She pressed her palms flat against the solid brick wall. She took slow, deep breaths until her hands finally stopped shaking. She smoothed down her apron and wiped her face, fixing her expression. When she walked back out into the bright, noisy market, her eyes were completely clear. She had made a decision. The small restaurant was completely empty, and the evening air outside the window had turned dark and quiet. Between them, 2 cups of green tea were slowly going cold. Neither of them had taken a single sip. Elena rested her hands flat on the wooden table. She took a deep breath. She had spent the entire day figuring out if she was brave enough to say this out loud. "Your right wrist," Elena spoke first, her voice quiet but entirely steady. "You have a scar shaped like a small crescent moon." Taejin froze, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "I saw it today," Elena continued. "And I remembered it. I remembered it from a terrifying, foggy night 7 years ago. A night I have tried very hard to forget." The silence in the room grew heavy. Taejin did not look away, but the tight control in his jaw showed that he was listening to every single word. Elena reached into her bag. She pulled out a piece of notebook paper and slid it across the table. It was Alma's drawing. There were 3 colorful figures on the page, a tall one, a medium one, and a very small one in the center, holding both of their hands. At the bottom, written in careful, block letters, were the words, "My family." "She has been drawing this same picture since she could hold a crayon," Elena said softly. She looked at the feared Mafia boss, stripping away all the secrets between them. "She is yours. I know it the same way I know other true things in the world. Alma is your daughter." Taejin looked down at the drawing. He stared at the bright yellow crayon marks and the careful letters. Everything he had built for 30 years, the thick ice, the dark suits, the terrifying Mafia rules, came crashing down. It did not happen loudly. It did not happen with a dramatic explosion. It collapsed completely and quietly, the exact way a building falls when the foundation was always wrong to begin with. Kong Taejin, the most feared man in the city, pressed his hand over his mouth. His broad shoulders shook. Slowly, tears spilled over his eyelashes and ran down his sharply defined face. He did not try to hide it. "I am so sorry," he whispered. His voice was broken. He was apologizing for the night they didn't choose, for the years he missed, and for the heavy pain she had carried all alone. Elena looked at his tears. She did not reach out to hold his hand, but her dark eyes softened. "We start from now," Elena said quietly. It was not forgiveness. Forgiveness would take much more time. But it was something more honest. It was an open door. And for tonight, with both of them standing right at the edge of it, that was enough. Sunday morning brought a soft, golden light to the small apartment. When the quiet footsteps paused outside the front door, Alma opened it before a single knock could sound. Kong Taejin stood in the hallway. For the first time, he was not wearing a sleek black suit. He wore a simple, dark sweater, looking less like a feared Mafia boss and more like a normal, slightly nervous man. Alma pushed her round glasses up her nose and looked him up and down. She gave a firm, satisfied nod and stepped aside, leaving the door open with the calm air of someone whose morning schedule had been cleared for exactly this meeting. They gathered in the cozy living room. Taejin sat on the edge of the sofa, his hands clasped tightly together. Elena sat nearby, taking a deep breath before she carefully explained the truth to her daughter. Alma listened quietly. She did not act surprised or confused. When her mother finished speaking, the fierce little girl simply climbed down from her chair. Her colorful beaded braids clicked together as she walked straight across the room and stopped right in front of Taejin. She reached out and took his large, scarred hand in both of her small ones. "I will hold your hand so you can never disappear," Alma said, her dark eyes completely serious. "That is the rule now." Taejin let out a shaky breath. He held her small fingers as gently as he could. "I understand the rule," he whispered. Alma tilted her head. "Dad," she said softly, testing the word out and letting it settle into the quiet room. Then, she looked at him with sharp, evaluating eyes. "Do you love my mommy?" Taejin glanced at Elena, whose heart skipped a heavy beat. He looked back at his brilliant daughter and answered honestly, I am working on it. Alma considered this answer with great seriousness. She gave one sharp nod. That is acceptable. But you should know I have a strict plan, and your timeline is not unlimited. Before Taejin could even smile, Alma climbed right into his lap. She was entirely uninvited, but she settled against his broad chest like she was entirely at home. She rested her head comfortably, exactly as she had drawn in her notebook for years. Across the room, Elena pressed her hand over her mouth. Her dark eyes were very bright with happy tears. The colorful crayon drawing of 3 people holding hands had finally jumped off the page and found its true, living shape. Alma snuggled deeper into Taejin's sweater. Her quiet voice drifted up to him one more time. Dad. Taejin closed his eyes, resting his chin gently on the top of her head. Yes, Alma. Your manners are much better now, she said proudly. Consistency works. I told you that. She looked over at Elena. Mommy, can we have extra rice today? I think this is a very special occasion. Elena laughed, a bright, beautiful sound. Yes, my love. Extra rice.